Thanks for everyone being with us today. Welcome to today's webinar, co-presented by the EAUC and UEDA about CARES funding, CARES Act funding, and an update presented by the Economic Development Administration. My name is Tim Hines. I'm the Executive Director of the University Economic Development Association, and really happy that you all can be with us today, and very pleased to welcome folks from the EDA to give us an update on CARES Act funding and how our constituents, both higher education and their allies, can develop a relationship, especially around funding. So we appreciate you being with us today. As it relates to our webinar, just some housekeeping items. We are recording today's webinar and we'll post it later on our social media channels. If you do have a question for our presenters, questions go in the question and answer section. So there's a Q&A section of Zoom that I'm sure we're all familiar with by now, so please use the Q&A section for that. If you need to chat with us for any reason, please use the chat function that is located in the Zoom panel. That will get you directly to us, and if you have any technical issues, we'll try to work through those with you. Everyone's going to be on mute today, except for our presenters as they present. So with that, we'll get started. As I mentioned, my name is Tim Hines. I'm the Executive Director of the University Economic Development Association. And just a little bit about our association for those of you who might not be familiar with us who are on the call today. The University Economic Development Association connects our members, and our members are ecosystems of higher education institutions, private sector businesses, and economic development organizations, so higher education and their allies. We work with them to facilitate resources that help spawn economic growth within their communities. UEDA members represent those who are on the cutting edge of modern economic development. And success in our modern economy is all about innovation and entrepreneurship. It's about fostering talent in young people from preschool through life to embolden them and think and create outside the traditional academic or professional requirements. And it's about creating environments that will attract those people who want to make and do things in new ways and retain that talent to start the process all over again in the next generation. So never before, especially in the times we're facing now, have academia, the private sector, and the economic development stakeholders, those who we call our UEDA members, never have they been so reliant on one another to create economic opportunity. UEDA members work together to expand economic opportunity within their communities and regions by leveraging talent, innovation, and place, and recognizing the interconnectedness of each of these elements. If you are not familiar with UEDA and would like more information, I encourage you to reach out to me directly. You can find my information on the UEDA website, which is on your screen, universityeda.org, and I'd be happy to talk to you about membership or any other ways you can engage with our association. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dan Ripke, who is the Executive Director of the EAUC, for a brief overview of EAUC and then to introduce today's guests. Dan.
Great, thank you, Tim. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on what part of the country you're located in. Again, I'm with an organization called the Educational Association of University Centers. It's comprised of roughly 60+ EDA-funded university centers across the country. The association has been in existence for a little over 25 years, and we focus primarily on supporting the EDA centers through a variety of programs. One, we support advocacy at the federal, state, and local level, helping to get the message out about the importance of the EDA University Center program and the program impacts. We build awareness both with policymakers, but also within the host institutions. It's vital that the host organizations know the importance of the programs. We really focus on measuring impacts. We're trying to really synthesize what is both the programmatic impact of the programs in terms of outcomes as well as processes. We also focus on peer-to-peer learning, where we have individual centers help other centers around the country, and really focus on cross-discipline learning. So fields from different, like sociology, engineering, they're all different types of university centers around the country, try to bring in various disciplines to get cross-fertilization of programs. And finally, last but not least, is mentor support. There's a constant competition of EDA university centers around the country. And so what we really like to do is to make sure that the existing university centers can really help to mentor the new centers that come on board. So it's a great organization of the existing EDA centers around the country. So And with that, Tim, should I go ahead and introduce our first speakers, or?
Yeah, go for it. Thanks.
Okay, so the first speaker on the agenda that I have is Joel Fauchon. Joel, in May of 2019, Joel was appointed the U.S. Department of Commerce Economic Development Administration to serve as the Director of the Office of External Affairs and Communication. At EDA, he manages the Public Affairs Department and the Legislative and Intergovernmental Affairs Department, and as well as leading the Opportunity Zone work. So Joel has an extensive career dating back to working in the Peace Corps from 2017 to 19, as well as working internationally in Africa and other countries. So with that, Joel.
Thanks, Dan. One thing, I think Dennis is going first. He's teeing this up for us.
Okay, my apologies. I had him first on the agenda.
That's okay.
Dennis, I know you well. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
Good, good. For those that don't know Dennis, Dennis also has an extensive career working with the Economic Development Administration. In fact, Dennis and I saw each other in Reno last fall, and I could swear I knew him from a previous life, but I think it's just from previous EDA program. So Denis serves as a Deputy Assistant Secretary for Regional Affairs, overseeing the activities of the EDA's Office of Regional Affairs, which manages programs operating in EDA's headquarters in the 6 regional offices. Earlier in his career, he served as various EDA leadership posts, including acting Deputy Assistant Secretaries for the Economic Development, Regional Affairs, and External Affairs. He also led the Bureau's work in multilateral organizations for economic cooperation and development, OECD, where he served as the Vice Chair of the Working Party on Territorial Policy in Urban Areas. So Denis, take it away.
Hey, thanks very much, Dan. It's great to be with you again today. And I think Reno was the last time we crossed paths in person. Again, good to be with you, and also great to be working with Tim again. I really want to thank him and UEDA for hosting us. You're really pleased to count institutions of higher education as our vital long-term partners in economic development. You've probably heard me make this observation before, but I really mean it, that throughout my 20-plus year career in economic development, almost every successful economic development strategy and initiative that I've seen has included university input and involvement in some way, shape, or form, whether that comes in the form of data and analytics for good decision making, or strategy development, or actually implementing programs to help communities to thrive and succeed in a growing global economy. Universities are really at the forefront of successful economic development. So I want to thank all of you who are on the line today for your participation and the work that you're doing to foster job creation and economic growth in your communities. I can think of no time in our nation's history where your work will be more important and mean more than it does today, given the circumstances that we are confronted with. I'm pleased to be joined today, as Dan mentioned, by my colleague, Joel Fauchon, Director of EDA's Office of External Affairs and Communication. Joel's going to provide an overview of the CARES Act funding available through EDA. Also joining today will be Bernadette Grafton, who serves as a program analyst in our Office of Performance and National Programs and as our University Center coordinator. So I know many of you are familiar with Bernadette and know Bernadette well. She'll be discussing the supplemental grant process in which we're making non-competitive grants to University Center economic development districts, tribal organizations, and RLF operators. So with that, it's my pleasure to turn the program over to Joel, and I'm looking forward to engaging with you all in Q&A later on. Thanks.
Thank you, Dennis, and thank you also, Tim, Dan, EAUC, and UEDA for hosting us today. Like Dennis said, we greatly appreciate having you as partners. It's a pleasure to join all of you, provide an overview of EDA's CARES Act recovery assistance work, which I'm going to go into detail here. One point before I get started, and as Dennis said, we've been doing a lot of CARES Act briefing during the past weeks. And I start each with sharing that I recognize we are in the midst of a national crisis, that your and many communities are struggling, and that it may sound awkward to say, but EDA is excited about the days, weeks, and months ahead. And this is because of the role we are playing in helping the country respond to and recover economically from this pandemic. And you have a similar role. And again, we really value your partnership and all that you're doing. Again, as Dennis said, I'll briefly talk about the CARES Act as it pertains to EDA, give an overview of our CARES Act recovery assistance, who is eligible, how opportunity zones fit in, and then share a few important websites and web pages. So let's jump right in. Next slide, please. Thank you. As you know, on March 27th, President Trump signed the $2 trillion CARES Act into law. And on May 7th, Secretary Ross announced that EDA is now accepting applications for our CARES Act recovery assistance funding opportunities. And the Act provides EDA with $1.5 billion, of which $1.467 billion is available for grant making. And the remaining funds will cover EDA salaries and expenses and oversight activities. The Act also granted EDA special hiring authority, and I'll speak about this shortly. The Act did not alter in any way EDA's mission or goals, which, as you know, is to make grants in and help drive economic development to distressed communities in areas recovering from natural disasters. The Act does specifically state, however, that EDA should make CARES Act grants to eligible communities, and I quote, to prevent, prepare, and respond to coronavirus. And we intend to deploy our funding as quickly, effectively, and efficiently as possible and in a manner that meets the needs of our communities. Next slide, please. Thank you. To offer maximum flexibility and to be as responsive to the economic development needs and priorities of our local and regional stakeholders, we are making our CARES Act recovery assistance grants under the authority of our Economic Adjustment Assistance, or EAA program, which many of you are familiar with. And EDA CARES Act recovery assistance investments under EAA will support a wide range of non-construction and construction activities. And they include economic recovery planning and preparing technical assistance strategies, preparing or updating resiliency plans to respond to future pandemics, capitalizing or recapitalization of revolving loan funds. EDA supports about 500 of those across the country. Implementing a coronavirus-specific innovation and entrepreneurship challenge. Our Office of Innovation and Entrepreneurship is working on that and should have that completed shortly. And of course, constructing public works and facilities that will support economic recovery, including the deployment of broadband to support telehealth and remote learning for job skills, among numerous other high-impact projects. So next slide, please. Thank you. Eligibility. So who is eligible for EDA CARES Act funding? We determined that economic injury from the coronavirus pandemic constitutes a special need under the EAA program, and eligibility may be established on that basis without reference to other economic distress criteria. And this means that essentially every community in the country is eligible. However, applicants must explain clearly in their application how the project would, again, prevent, prepare for, or respond to coronavirus. And they have to also show economic injury as a result of coronavirus. And that's a pretty low bar because most communities across the country are suffering and can establish that. Since we are administering these funds under our EAA program, eligible applicants remain the same, and they include, as you can see, district organizations, American Indian tribes, state or political subdivisions of states, and these are counties, cities, municipalities, institutions of higher education, which means you all, or consortium of institutions of higher education, and a public or private nonprofit organization or association that's working in cooperation with a state. Next slide, please. Thank you. As many of you know, the Department of Commerce is a member of the White House Opportunity Revitalization Council. It's headed by Scott Turner. He's the executive director and a great champion for the council and opportunity zones. And EDA has been working with the council on delivering relief to communities affected by COVID-19 and looking for ways that we can do this in an effective and an impactful way. And mainly with our core and disaster supplemental funding, which is, as you all may know, about $320 million in an annual appropriation from Congress. And in the last 2 fiscal years, we've received $600 million in disaster supplemental funding. In that funding, there have been opportunity zone projects that we funded through that. And so since FY 2018, EDA has invested more than $447 million in 322 projects in or near opportunity zones across the country. And again, that's using our core funding and our disaster funding. And we expect our CARES Act funding to do the same and fund opportunity zone projects as well. EDA has also made several significant policy changes regarding opportunity zones, and this is per the council. In 2018, we made opportunity zones eligible for funding from any notice of funding opportunity that the agency puts out. So our CARES Act is one of those. And this allows us to consider opportunity zone applications regardless of the specific level of economic distress. And last year, EDA also added opportunity zones as an investment priority, which further prioritized them as an area of focus for grant making for us. So both of these policies mean that if you're in an opportunity zone and you apply for if you apply for EDA funds for a project in an opportunity zone, we're automatically going to consider that application. There are other criteria that you have to meet, but we're absolutely going to consider that. And additionally, as you may know, EDA incorporated opportunity zones into our comprehensive economic development strategy, SEDS, content guidelines. And this is to assist local and regional planning partners in building effective approaches to maximize the benefit of opportunity zones. So we did that last year, and we're really happy about that too. So also, we created a website with the Indiana University and its Kelley School of Business. And that website is statsamerica.org/opportunity. And it's a good tool to let you know some demographics and other really key data for investors or others in opportunity zones. Next slide, please. So special hiring authority. Excuse me, as I mentioned, the CARES Act also provided EDA with special hiring authority, and that was to assist us with building the capacity we need to expediently administer our CARES Act funding. And as such, we're seeking quality job applicants to both promote our funding opportunities and administer all these grants that were applications that we're receiving and grants that we will make under the CARES Act. And we identified more than 80 critical positions that we need to fill in our 6 regional offices and headquarters in Washington, D.C., or remotely until we're back working in the office. And as President Trump, Vice President Pence, and others have said, the administration's fight against the coronavirus pandemic is not just a whole of government approach, but a whole of America approach. And we've taken this to heart and have made it part of our recruitment efforts. I encourage your networks, you and your networks, to visit our CARES Act Recovery Assistance Job Openings webpage. It's eda.gov/careers. And there you can see all of our available opportunities and how to apply for these jobs to join our team. And employees under our CARES Act hiring authority, they're hired as Schedule A employees. They're hired as Schedule A employees into the accepted service for a period of not exceeding 2 years. So there's a term limit on those. Next, and I believe the last slide for me, please. Yes. Websites. So listed on the screen there, grants.gov is where eligible entities can apply for our CARES Act recovery assistance funding opportunities. EDA.gov/coronavirus is our webpage that we launched on May 7th, and it has all of our CARES Act recovery assistance, frequently asked questions, information on eligible entities, guidance for communities, and more. And we update that frequently. We had some good updates last week, and we'll have a few this week as well. And again, eda.gov/careers is where we have our job opportunities. So I'll stop there and I'll turn it over to Bernadette, who, as you all know, needs no introduction. So Bernadette, over to you.
Thank you, Joel. I'm really excited to be here with all of you today. I do see many familiar names on the webinar. Hopefully I'll be able to meet the rest of you at some point in the near future. I'll be providing some information on the CARES Act non-competitive supplemental grants process, as well as a little extra information on the competitive process today before we get into our Q&A. Next slide, please. So EDA is making the majority of our CARES Act funds available through an addendum to our Public Works and Economic Adjustment Assistance NOFO. And as Joel stated, that is on grants.gov. You can just search for it by searching in PWEA 2020. The addendum is at the end of that NOFO. So just as some background information on that, awards under this CARES Act are going to be made in two parallel processes. We've got our usual competitive process and then the non-competitive process. First, I want to cover the non-competitive process. EDA has determined that the suddenness and the scale of the economic dislocations constitute a situation of unusual and compelling urgency to make these non-competitive awards to expedite the response to this pandemic. The supplemental funds are limited for a limited period of time, and we have to award them no later than September 30th of 2022. And for the most part, these awards are going to have the same scope of work, and depending on the type of grantee, there's a certain maximum award amount, and the awards really can't be tailored to an applicant's circumstances or preferences. These are all very similar. That's how we're able to make this a streamlined process. The invitation letters have been sent to eligible recipients under the three classes of EDA grantees that you see here. We have our EDDs / tribes that are receiving partnership planning grants, the university centers, current university centers, and current recipients of our EDA revolving loan fund grants. And these letters were sent to eligible recipients under each of these categories. So if you believe that you qualify and haven't received an invitation letter, please reach out to your economic development representative. EDA.gov/contact is where you can find all of that. Each of the awards has a standard scope of work, as I said, and maximum award amounts. You don't have to request the maximum award amount. The key here is that you should request as much as you are able to spend within the 24-month period of performance. To elaborate on that a little bit more, the period of performance is 24 months because this is something that needs to be expedited promptly. We're responding to this pandemic, so projects must be implemented as soon as possible. And really just the key phrase is time is of the essence here. Applicants for non-competitive awards are committing to expend their full award amount. And if for some reason they can't, that money can be taken back. An applicant, as I said, may request less than the award amount. These are 100% federal grant rate awards. There is no matching or cost share requirement. And eligible applicants have received an invitation letter with very detailed instructions on how to apply. The applications are due within 30 days of the date of the letter. This is generally around early to mid-June, and there may be some flexibilities depending on when the regional office sent out the invitation letters. So I would just say reach out to your EDA region if you have any more questions about that. Applicants are required to submit a grant administration plan and a waste, fraud, and abuse training certificate within 60 days of award. The key here with this is that The grant administration plan is this lists out the details of the award, the list of the tasks to be undertaken, an explanation of who is doing what task in your staffing plan, timeline for implementation. All of those details are hashed out within 60 days of award, so that with this initial application, you're really just submitting the bare minimum, outlining your general scope of work. Those details don't need to be outlined in the initial application. Applicants who accept a non-competitive award may also apply for funding for a different scope of work through the competitive process. And applicants who aren't participating in the non-competitive process may also apply through the competitive process. This process is largely the same as the process for awarding grants under our other programs contained in the FY 2020 PLEA-NOFO. So that's, some of you may be familiar with that process already. The main difference is that we're responding to the coronavirus pandemic and economic injury from that. So there has to be a clear nexus. So there is, I just want to put in a plug for other resources that are available on our eda.gov/coronavirus website. There are a couple of webinars that have been pre-recorded. One of them covers this general grants process, the competitive process specifically, and the other webinar covers the non-competitive process. So I encourage you to check those out. They're very informative. There's a lot of FAQs in those webinars as well. And then there's, as Joel mentioned, there's other resources that are being updated very regularly. So I would definitely point you to our website if you're looking for any further details on any of this. So with that, I don't have anything else that I wanted to share with you today. I just wanted to make sure you are aware of both of our non-competitive and competitive funding opportunities under CARES Act. I believe that's it for me on slides. Questions?
That is, yeah, thanks. We'll get into some questions here. Just a reminder, if you do have any questions, use the Q&A function. It's at the bottom of your Zoom panel, and we'll get to those questions here during this section. One of the questions we did receive is if the slides will be available to all participants, and we will make the slides available to everyone, as well as, again, posting a recording of the webinar on our social media channels for UEDA and EAUC coming up after the session here today. A couple of questions. One that is here already. What's the current status of funding? Is there, I think everyone has heard of, PPP funding drying up quickly, and what's the landscape of the CARES Act funding that EDA has? I guess more from the competitive side than the non-competitive side.
Sure, Tim. As Bernadette said, we are encouraging, and I'll say this up front before we answer the question, folks to apply as soon as possible. We are starting possibly this week to announce CARES Act Recovery Assistance Awards. So we've been receiving applications, and we're going to start making those awards. $1.5 billion is a lot of money, and at the same time, it's not a lot of money. And our regional directors are saying that they're starting to get more and more applications, and those pipelines are filling up. So we have till the end of September 2022 to spend the funds. We believe we'll be able to do that. But right now we're in the application acceptance mode, and we're going to be into that for a bit, but also we're now stepping into awards mode. So the sooner folks can apply, the better, because we really want to get this money out onto the streets as soon as possible.
Thanks, Joel. And do you feel that there could be more money coming, or do we think that this is it?
That's a great question for Congress. And we're doing our level best to manage our $1.5 billion. And again, our CORES funding, we still have some of our disaster supplemental 2, is what we're calling it, funding left. But I think the House and Senate may consider another package before July 4th. And there may be some EDA assistance in there. We're just not quite sure yet.
Okay, and the performance period has to be 24 months. Can it be 18 months? Can it be shorter than what's been stated?
Bernadette, thoughts on that, or Dennis?
I'm sorry, Joel.
My-
I missed the question. Can you repeat it?
Sure. The performance period, as far as being 24 months, can it be 18 months?
Well, it may depend on whether or not you're dealing with a non-competitive versus a competitive award. Is that your understanding as well, Bernadette?
Yes, for the non-competitive awards, we are pretty strict on that period of performance of 2 years. We want to make sure that these awards are making the most impact. So if you have any more questions about that, there may be some flexibilities depending on the type of entity. So I would just encourage you to reach out to the regional office with those questions if you have a specific project in mind that you think would require an 18-month period of performance.
Okay.
However, for the competitive awards, we could certainly work with you to structure an appropriate period of performance.
Okay. And for the competitive funding opportunities, what sorts of desirable elements are making attractive proposals to EDA, both perhaps in elements themselves and maybe areas of focus, sectors, those kinds of things?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be quite intuitive to people. You know, there's the overarching requirement, of course, that came to us in the statute that all of our grant work has to help communities to prepare for or respond to the economic impacts of the coronavirus pandemic. So, of course, that's pretty broad given the nature of the pandemic and the very extensive economic impacts that has resulted. But in terms of coming up with proposals that are going to be most competitive, you're probably going to want to think about various strategies that are going to help to specifically address those impacts. So there may be particular industry sectors or areas that have been significantly impacted within your region that you're going to want to be devising strategies and interventions around trying to address. Those proposals, of course, would be looked upon very favorably in this context.
Thanks. And there's been rumors that there may be another university center application period open for new university centers in fiscal year 21. Is that something that you're able to confirm? And that's likely going to affect the scope of competitive applications for CARES Act funding.
So I can take that one. Yes, so we have our next University Center program competition coming up in FY21. The two regional offices that the competition will be open for is our Chicago regional office and our Philadelphia regional office. We only do 2 regions at a time. So I would say if you think that there might be an issue in parsing out your scope of work, that could be a conversation with your regional office, but I don't see there being too much conflict, especially if you just, if you're looking for separate pots of funding on that. They would be separate scopes of work is really the key there.
Okay. And it seems that the declaration of emergency provides a blanket of eligibility, and that might handle this, but is that the only reference that needs to be made in the regional eligibility section of ED 900 on qualifying conditions of economic distress, or is that better directed to regional representatives?
You know, on that one, it is. I mean, they're so nuanced and specific that a regional EDR or a regional director, but regional offices can help applicants with that. But really, it is. I mean, you have to show economic distress and articulate that in a narrative and in other points of the application. And for example, we received an application that from Utah, the state of Utah. It wasn't their application, but the applicant is from Utah. And they were talking about how 2 years ago, the first week of April, there were 5,000 unemployment applications that they were aware of. In the first week of April this year, there are 35,000 unemployment applications from the state of Utah. So, you know, that granular detail and showing that economic harm with that type of data and support is key. But again, an EDR or our regional offices can really help guide applicants on that. And Bernadette, Dennis, you may have something to add on that.
No, I just put into the chat box some of the language that we're using as far as the CARES Act special need criteria. It's just that you have to clearly explain how your project would prevent, prepare for, and respond to coronavirus or respond to economic injury as a result of coronavirus. Those are very important phrases and terminology here for these awards.
But it really is, just to clarify, it really is a matter of describing that in the narrative for your project. So just as the questioner inquired, if you do an adequate job outlining that in your narrative, you should be fine.
Thanks. So for competitive awards, does a public university presenting a proposal need to create an alliance with a private entity in order to apply?
No, a public university can apply alone. I think that it's always beneficial to have a partnership with other organizations and especially local and regional partners. I would encourage that, absolutely. That will make a stronger case, but a public university is able to apply for these funds.
Thanks. Dan, I want to throw it to you and see if you have any questions from the EAUC side, or if you have any questions of your own that you'd like to ask of our panel.
Just a very general one. I'm on calls throughout the week hearing about state budgets being cut dramatically, universities having their budgets dramatically slashed. In order to apply for these types of grants, there does need to be matching funds provided by the host organization. How flexible is EDA in terms of the matching fund situation?
Yeah, EDA is trying to exercise maximum flexibility in regards to these funds. And we are acutely aware, as Joel stated earlier, of the exigent economic circumstances that the nation is confronted with at these times, and how many state, local, university, other traditional economic development partners' budgets have been adversely impacted by these circumstances. So, of course, we're looking at every instance individually, but I would say that we're fortunate in that Congress gave us the authority to provide grants up to 100% under the CARES Act. So based on your individual circumstances, I would encourage you to open up that dialogue with your economic development representative and your EDR and your regional office staff to determine how best to proceed in that regard.
Great, thank you.
Regarding the competitive grant opportunities, it's been said that perhaps that rumors maybe that EDA's focus is on high wage, high skill, long-term jobs. Is there a case to be made for a project that broadens that focus? For example, creation of livable wage jobs that help people escape unemployment, poverty, or even assistance with placement of individuals into existing but vacant positions, especially in the light of the new economic reality.
I can start. I would say that we evaluate projects based on the need in the defined area. So that is a case that needs to be made. If there is a need for these livable wage jobs, ones that kind of are helping people escape unemployment, when that is a major need in the area, that's a great, I think that's a great nexus, especially if it's specific to recovery from COVID-19, response and recovery. And placement of individuals into existing but vacant positions, that's an economic need, and perhaps there's some upskilling that's involved in that. I think that that's not outside the scope of projects that EDA would fund, especially in partnership with other organizations in the region when you're talking about doing job training and all of that. I don't know if others have thoughts on this specific question.
I don't, Bernadette. That was spot on.
Sorry, I was having trouble unmuting myself before. I think that was spot on, Bernadette. I think the key point, the key takeaway there is really that we do take a regional and local approach to looking at these issues, and project decisions are based on the needs in the regions and localities where we work. I also think it might be worth a clarifying point. Often people talk about our desire to have higher skill, higher wage jobs, and they somehow interpret that as being a barrier to moving forward with EDA. And I really hope that isn't the case, because we really are taking a localized approach. So it's relative to the prevailing wage and prevailing skill set of the region in which we're working. And it's really more a desire to be forward-looking and continually advancing the nature of the regional economies in which we're working. It's not meant to be a barrier to entry. So I would encourage anyone that's having difficulty with that language to really open up a dialogue with their EDR to explore about how your project idea might fit within the needs of your region.
Given that it's a national crisis, could multi-state projects, is that an interesting approach to propose solutions for recovery, especially considering the localized view that you just mentioned?
Tim, I can jump in. Go ahead, Dennis.
Yeah, go ahead. No, go ahead, Joel, if you want to start.
Yeah, what I was going to say is, EDA, as you all know, we're about regional economic development as well. Also, we do have a sentence or two in the notice of funding opportunity that talks about national programs, telehealth, broadband, and how it works in that aspect. So the short answer is yes. Maybe Dennis can add some color to that.
Yeah, I would just elaborate a little bit to say that we do recognize that this is a unique response to an economic dislocation that has taken place on a scale that we haven't experienced before. Just typically with natural disaster supplementals, we're used to really addressing the localized impacts of those natural disasters. Here, those economic impacts are quite diffuse. And as a result of that, we have included in our notice of funding opportunity some funds to support national research and technical assistance type projects, but we also are envisioning specifically a challenge competition of some type in the innovation and entrepreneurship space. And those may well be broader regional projects in size and scope. I would also say that many of our traditional projects are intended to be regional in scope. So an infrastructure project may serve a broader multi-state area. A revolving loan fund project likewise may have a very large lending area and service diffuse constituencies. So we do have a variety of tools to get at those broader impacts as well.
Great, thank you. And I want to just highlight a few things that we have coming up on our schedule as we work to wrap up today. Seeing no more questions, I'm sure that I know Dennis and Joel and Bernadette are all very accessible folks. So if you do have additional questions, please feel free to reach out to EDA, comment on our social media posts. We'll try to get you the right answers if you do have additional questions. But I did want to point out, for those of you that do know UEDA, we focus on best practices, and that's what we're best known for. That culminates in the Awards of Excellence program that we have. That is nearing its deadline. We've extended it to July 1st. So if you do have regional projects that you feel are exemplary of being original, scalable, and impactful. We want to hear about those, and we want to focus and recognize those. So please go to our website. You can shortcut to the awards section by going to awards.universityeda.org and finding more information about our Awards of Excellence program. And similarly, we have, I know that we're all digitally overloaded right now, but our summit is switching to digital in September, but we've vowed not to make it a typical digital event. This is going to be, we're calling it a virtual economic accelerator event, and the theme is redesigning the future amidst dynamic change. So we are actually going to be working on regional challenges, hearing from industry, higher education experts, actively participating in digital workspaces, design thinking sessions, visual collaborations, all to develop framework for accelerating regional economies. So it's going to be immersive, engaging, and we're really excited about the opportunity to do that. It's going to involve not only higher education, but also the higher education allies that we spoke about earlier. And we're really excited and encouraged to have that conference, and especially during these times to provide that resource to members and non-members alike, where ecosystems can collaborate together. So mark the dates on the calendar, September 21st to 24th. More information is going to be coming out shortly. We'll make sure you're all added to our listserv and get access to that. And I'm sure that, you know, as part of that, definitely EAUC and EDA will be engaging with us throughout, I'm sure. So with that, you know, on behalf of Dan at EAUC, and the rest of folks at UEDA, I'd like to thank Joel, Dennis, and Bernadette for being with us today, for your insight, and as well, John Atwood behind the scenes, kind of making it all happen. And really appreciate it today, and look forward to future conversations as we move forward. So so thank you all for being with us today.
Thank you, Tim.
Thanks for having us, Tim.
Yep, everyone stay safe. Take care.
You as well. Bye.